It's all been about how can I tell the story of this person, this brand, this, religion, this culture, this family. Like, how can I take these seemingly abstract ideas and make them really tangible and relatable and attractive to other people as well?
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Oh My Curry Goodness. My name is Hamza Islam. On each episode of this podcast, I talk to Gen Zers from different fields about their story and the experiences that have shaped them into who they are today. I created this podcast, Oh My Curry Goodness, because while it's a really catchy tone or catchy thing, and I hope that people say it at some point in their life, which I know it probably won't happen, one of the biggest reasons why I created this podcast is because I want to know what it's like to be in other people's shoes. While people can have the capacity to do incredible things, it's important to remember that they're human beings. And yes, they've had a lot of incredible things go in their life, but there's a lot of challenges and experiences, good and bad, that have shaped them into who they are today. So that's why I want to create a podcast where I want to focus on the human being as much as possible. Sure, like I said, they've done great things, but I just want my guests to be simply known as human beings. And so I hope you guys, as listeners, take a few lessons away from each guest that you think can apply to your personal life. And I also hope that you remember that you are a human being and that it's okay to share those good and bad experiences because that's what makes you you. And also continue to emphasize the importance of understanding people because storytelling is one of the few things that make a human being a human being. So I hope you guys continue to check back each and every week to learn from incredible Gen Zers. Now, this week, I am speaking with Marcus Knight, who is a content creator, motivational speaker, and soon to be podcaster whose podcast, The Roundtable, will discuss topics in the news and everything about Gen Z. Now, I don't know exactly when this podcast will come up, but I know it'll come out at some point later this year or maybe next year. Only Marcus knows, but nevertheless, it's so exciting to see Gen Zers getting involved in podcasting and also content creation and motivational speaking. So, Marcus Knight, thank you so much for joining Oh My Curry Goodness.
Thank you so much for having me. It's going to be a fun time.
Yeah, and first of all, I was really excited to be able to have you on the podcast because one of the things that is very important to you is yes, you have all these incredible things, but you emphasize the importance of optimism, positivity, and making people's day better. So I can tell that I was when I saw motivational speaking, I was like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, it makes sense. That makes sense. So, and also the fact that you have your own podcast. So I'm looking forward to that. Now, I do have to ask you because this was a question I thought about before you came on. There's two buttons that somehow give me some worry. There's the publish button where like once
Mm,
it's out there, and then more specifically, there's the recording button. For you,
mm.
which button right now are you a bit which button kind of gives you anxiety? Because recording is more like two, three people if you're with a few
Right.
people, or maybe it's by yourself. But then the publish button, everyone can see it, and so you have that sense of like some people might like it, some people might not. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that? I know, like I said, the podcast is like a while from now, but it's something that I've been thinking a lot for some reason.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think the publish button is a little bit scarier. I think, especially when you're in a creative space, being able to create amazing content that relates to a lot of different people and really speaks to the situations that people might be going through. You get a little bit used to actually creating the content, filming the videos, doing all those things. That part's never the hard part. But when you're actually putting things out into the world with your name attached to it, it can be a little daunting just because you don't know how people are going to react or take it, or if they're even going to share or like or comment or what have you. But what I've learned, especially over the last couple of years or so, is that it's worth it to put out the content that you want to put out because somebody somewhere is going to need to hear specifically what you have to say. And even if the gratitude doesn't come instantly, you'll be very glad that you did.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I kind of go back in both ways where the only reason why the publishing button doesn't scare me too much is maybe because, and I've been open about this, which is the fact that I don't have a really big audience. So when I look at the things that I can control, which is the conversations I have with the guests, I think the recording button has that little bit of fear where it's like the
Mm,
moment you start recording, it's like, okay, I got to make sure that I am the best podcast host possible and that we have
right.
the best conversations because I don't know if you've ever encountered this, but I know it's been encountered many times where you'll record and then all of a sudden you say the host says something bad or wrong and the guest leaves. That's I
Yeah.
never want that. So that's why I think the recording button gets scary because you want to have your best conversations, but you don't want to break any moral rules to the point where
Right.
Marcus leaves at some point. It's like, oh, it's on your fault.
Yeah, it's definitely a delicate balance between like making sure that you're hospitable towards like the people that you're interacting with, but then also making sure that your own brand and your own message is true. And so you're kind of like doing a little dancey dance, if you will, between the two.
You really are. But hey, I'm confident this is going to be a great conversation and I'm 0.0001%, no, 99.999% confident that you will not leave midway. It's like I'm done with this podcast. I'm not eating curry again. Or I'm not eating curry ever. Um, hence the name. Oh my great goodness. So let's talk about one of the things that make you, well, a few things that make you you. I saw on your LinkedIn, go me for stalking. You said that your story is told through music, worthy, and creativity. And I want to start by kind of like let's draw in your mind like a Venn diagram. Now I'm using
Mhm.
Venn diagrams because I had an exam where I had to go through a bunch of Venn diagrams. So I was like, I gotta
Yeah.
ask this question. Where is all the commonality in this? I want to
Right.
know from music, worthy, or especially with motivational speaking, because I know not only do you have positivity, but also when it comes to faith. Tell me a bit about if we were to draw a Venn diagram among music, creativity, and let's say instead of using worthy, let's use worship or motivational speaking. If you were to find the commonality among the three, what would you say those three things have in common? Because on the outside they have their differences. Well,
Right.
maybe music and creativity they have the same thing, but then when you
Yeah.
bring in like worship, then it's like, okay, where's the commonality in that? So I'd love to know from your experiences, what do those three things have in common in your person based on your personal experiences?
Yeah. I definitely grew up in a very musical household. All of my family enjoys music. I was singing in church from a very, very early age. I sang at church, I sang at school, I sang outside of both of those areas. And so music has always been a pretty big part of my life. Even so much so to where my dad would take me to concerts. We would listen to different bands in the car. He would have all of his vinyl records out, and we'd be listening to things in our house. So many different things. But then being involved in a spiritual way, getting more involved with my church and our worship teams and our choirs. And then even outside of spiritual life, doing creative things like starting a podcast or having a YouTube channel or posting things on Instagram or writing short stories, producing shows, things of that nature. I feel like of all of those things, the idea of storytelling is kind of the common thread, if you will, that kind of weaves itself throughout the entire thing. I think being able to communicate messages to people and being able to tell stories well and tell them often. I even did a lot of musical theater when I was in middle and high school. And so I loved being on stages. I loved being able to give entertainment, give inspiration. And I've done that in a multitude of ways, both at my undergrad alma mater, in middle and high school, outside of work. it's been a crazy ride trying to figure out different ways to do this in my personal life as well as in my professional life. But it's all been about how can I tell the story of this person, this brand, this, religion, this culture, this family. Like, how can I take these seemingly abstract ideas and make them really tangible and relatable and attractive to other people as well?
The key word that I really liked the key word that I really liked is relatability. And storytelling is a great way of relating with people because even if we don't share the same experiences, like literally, maybe there's a few
Exactly.
things where you're like, oh wait, okay, I can understand what this person goes might be going through because I went through something
Yeah.
similar. And and you are right when it comes to whether it's religion or just in anything, storytelling is used a lot. Um,
Yeah.
I know you and I share different faiths or different religions or follow different religions, excuse me, but nevertheless, when we share stories, I mean, there's so many stories with religion. You can
Yeah.
say, here's what happened here. What are some things you can take away from? What are some things you should follow slash not follow? So yeah, I mean, I think everything you said is so true. The fact that, yeah, music, creativity, and then religion or worship, they sound different or they look different, but when you look at the commonality, it's that
Yeah.
you are in a way telling a story. Sure, music is a little bit shorter because it's like 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 10,
Right.
depends, but nevertheless, I know what you're trying to say. It's like the fact that you're sharing a story from start to ending. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that's I think one of the best things about storytelling is that no matter what it is, it exists.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, I recently got the honor and the privilege of being able to deliver a TEDx speech last year. It just debuted a couple of weeks ago. But I actually got to speak on how we can actually recenter humanity through the act of storytelling. I feel like now, especially over the last couple of years, we've created this gap between people where whether it's religious or racial or economic or political, what have you, and we find a lot of things to separate ourselves. And so, in my view, the way to merge that together to solve that problem, to be on one accord in terms of how we interact with each other, is being able to really sit down and to listen to each other's stories and not even just listening to people when they talk, but believing them when they speak. And so when people tell you their stories, when people tell you their hopes and their dreams and their fears and their failures, it's not just I see you or I hear you, but it's also I believe you. And I can identify with bits and pieces of your story. I may not agree with you 100%, but there are little things that I can take away from it. And we're both better because of it, because we were so vulnerable and we took the risk and we kind of put ourselves off of the metaphorical pedestal and gave our time and our energy and our space to somebody else instead.
One thing I will add is that you said I believe you. I kind of look at it differently, where it's like I don't necessarily go with right or wrong. It's more like I
Mm,
understand you, and
yeah,
I'm not trying to say like, oh, it's not just about agreement or disagreement. It's more like, okay, this is how I don't like one of the things I always say. I don't think this will be a motto because I'm sure someone else has it, but if it's not, then I'll rightfully take it, which is the fact that I understand that I don't understand, right? Meaning
right,
meaning like I understand that I don't know what you went through. Sure, it may be right, wrong, left, right, whatever that is, but these are your experiences. And so
right,
that's what makes you you. And it's not like, why should I try to change it or agree or disagree? Because I'm not writing your story. You're writing your story.
exactly.
I want to ask you a stupid slash controversial question.
Always, always.
Let's see if you leave the meeting now. I'm kidding. Um, So, of the three, which one would you say between music, worship, and creativity, which one do you think is the most important? And that's a reason why I say that's the stupid question is because I guess for a lot of people, if you have a really unique relationship with religion, I think people will say religion. But then there are other
Yeah.
people that will go, sure, religion's a part of me, but like I want to be known for creativity or I want to be known for music. So among the
Hmm.
three, hopefully I'm using the word correctly. I sometimes get among and between mixed up. But among creativity, worship, and music, which one would you say is the most important to you? And secondly, the controversial question is, let's say we take out the most important thing to you. So let's say we take religion out of you, creativity out of you, music, whatever's the most important. If we take that out, what does Marcus lose?
Whew, those are some amazing questions. Um, a part of me wants to say that creativity is probably the one that is the most important. And the reason I say that is because you can't really have the other two without creativity. I mean, of course, you have like music is just a random, seemingly random assembly of notes and rhythms and melodies and beats. And it takes someone creative to make sure that that sounds nice and sounds like something that people would want to listen to. Um, and I mean, faith and worship and spirituality and religion, there is a sort of order to it. Like there's a certain set of things that you should probably do and probably not do. But I would also argue that in the Christian faith, one of the first things that we learn about in the Christian Bible is literally in the first five words of the book, which basically says, "In the beginning, God created." And so the first thing that you learn about God, besides he's in the beginning, is that he's a creative. Like he inhabits creativity, and he also calls us, if we are to believe that we are made in the image of God, we too, by basic logic and reasoning, are also creative. And so in my brain, you really can't have really like any other form of like structure, music, art, religion, education, social awareness. Like you can't really have any of these things if you're not willing to be creative and to be innovative and take risks and really step outside of the box. Beyond that, you're just, I don't know, you're just living a boring life, I guess.
That's really interesting. I would say, as someone who has a podcast and also I'm Muslim, and so like that's why I say that we share different religions. I would
Yeah.
say if religion is very important to me, and if you take that out, I feel like losing religion, it's kind of like if you've ever tried to go to a destination without a GPS, like you just don't
Mm,
know where you're going, and so your religion
yeah.
kind of gives you a sense of direction where it's like this is where you
Yeah.
go, this is where you don't go. I don't think you'll be
That's true.
recal. You could be. I guess you could see a sense where you might be recalculating, right? Like if you take a wrong turn, how much longer will you take to your destination? But religion's
Yeah.
a kind of like, okay, this is where you're gonna be, and make sure to follow that. Or else if you
Mm,
take it out, then it's like imagine as someone who's from Columbus, Ohio, and you tell me, hey Hamza, I want you to drive from Columbus to Chicago without a map, without a GPS. I have
wow.
no idea what I'm gonna be doing. I'm just gonna be
Wow.
driving and I won't exactly know where I'm going, or heck, I don't even know if I'll reach Chicago. Right? Just an example.
Wow.
So that's where I see it. I see religion is important. I know, and it's not to say that you don't value religion importantly. It's just like for me, it's like I see religion as important because it's like sure you have the creativity and everything, but it's like at the end of the day, religion has like some sort of like guidelines or values that you need to follow, regardless of what
Right.
religion it is. But it's like this is what you need to follow. This is what you need to do to get to that destination. So yeah, it's weird having these discussions, especially from different religions, but it's
Yeah.
one of those where it's like I would love to know because once again, I understand that I don't understand.
And I same here. Like, I mean, if you ask anybody about me, like the first, I don't know, maybe like second or third adjective that they'll use is that I'm churchy. And so I'm like super into like my faith journey. I do everything at church. I mean, I am a person that is really deeply rooted in the Christian faith. Now, granted, there's a difference, I think, between being a follower of Jesus and the kind of politicized like radical Christianity that we see like modeled in the United States today. But that's just me, and I'm not trying to get like all into those weeds because that could be a whole other conversation. But I do think that when I'm walking in this daily journey with my own faith, that there is a sense of creativity about being able to be open to the supernatural and to the unknown and things that you normally wouldn't think about. And so I think out of all of it, they're very intertwined, but there's definitely a creative aspect to all of it.
I want to transition now to the idea of speaking out on issues happening around the country or around the country. I know you've also done this a lot, but social justice, personal development. Well, I guess you could say personal development is something that is a problem in this country because we're all trying to figure out how to be our best version of ourselves. But
Yeah,
why I wanted to talk about that is you've obviously have had experience opening up about these issues, and you've also shared your personal stories or your experiences because I know that you have a book coming out where you'll share your experiences. I want to ask you because as ridiculous as it can be, sometimes we can go back to our earliest experiences and say, sure, we may not be sure, maybe a 5 or 6 year old wasn't marching and protesting about certain issues, but you can
yeah,
always have this thing where you go, you know, I remembered speaking out about something at 5 or 6 or at an early age, and it was a
yeah,
small thing at the time, but you can hold on to this feeling and go, I remember that feeling. Like, yeah, it was a small deal. It wasn't a big deal, but I remember the feeling I had when speaking out about something. And here you are
yeah.
now going with all these things are happening. You can go like, yeah, you're speaking about this issue. You're speaking about this issue. I guess what I'm trying to say, because I know I tend to ramble a lot, tell me a bit about your earliest experience speaking out about something. Because, like, again, a 5 or 6 year old would not have been marching or protesting, but
Yeah.
you can always look back and go, I remember helping this person, and I remember that feeling I had. And because of this feeling, I want to continue to do it, or I want to do more of this at some point in the future, or like in this case, as of today.
Mm. So I had a I had a scenario in my brain. And then as you were speaking, I thought of a story that my mom tells about me as a very young kid. And she got a call one day that I was in the principal's office. And I'm not a bad kid by any means. Like Marcus Knight does not go to the principal's office. That just does not happen. And so she's freaking out and she's like driving her minivan down to the school to try and figure out what's going on. And she's freaking out. I'm freaking out. Everybody's freaking out. And she gets there and she finds out that I've ended up in the principal's office because I helped one of my friends on one of his tests in the classroom. And of course, as you know, an elementary school kid, you don't realize that you helping one of your friends during a test is cheating. Like you don't that doesn't like go across your brain at all. Um, I just saw somebody that I knew I could visibly see that was struggling. And I just did the thing that I just knew how to do. My mom always taught me, when somebody's in need, you go and help them. Like you don't like stand up to the side and just watch them suffer. You go and you extend a helping hand. And so I use that as a very like silly example, but from the very like early days of elementary school, I always had a knack for being able to look into a space, into an environment, and see who was not being treated well, who was at an unfair advantage, who was not in an equal or equitable space as somebody else, and being able to figure out ways that we could, even out the playing field as much as possible. And so, of course, now that is way, magnified. The stakes are a lot, harsher and deeper. You're talking about like all types of social justice, racial justice, environmental justice, all these things that are very, very much needed in our country and our world. But again, like going back to the idea of telling stories and being a connector of people and of places and of things. I simply just want to make sure that everybody has the same starting line. Everybody has the same resources. Everybody is able to create the life that they want to live and do authentically.
Well, and I want to say while you were talking, I was laughing because I love how you said, I just want to let people know I am not a bad person. And it'd be really funny. It's like the next time you give a motivational speaking, you have a motivational speaking engagement, you start off by saying, "Thank you, everybody. Happy to be here. First things first, I am not a bad person."
That is a
Like,
great way to start that
yeah,
off.
great way. But nevertheless, I think the story about the principal is weird and interesting at the same time. And it's weird. It's weird because you technically did a bad thing, which is like
Right.
you're helping someone. But I mean, kids don't know about cheating. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe not too much, but they don't. They just see themselves as, oh, here's someone who's going through something. Well, not going through something. Here's someone who clearly needs help, and I want to be able to help that person.
Yeah.
Not really realizing that you're actually cheating. You just see it as helping, and so yeah, thank you so much for sharing that because I know that sounds like a ridiculous thing, but there's a
Yeah.
reason why you held on to that because here you are today speaking about certain issues and things that are happening around the country. I remember for me, I didn't get to hang out with friends in high school. I'm now doing that in college, but like, well, one of the earliest memories I usually give on this podcast is when I met my favorite professional soccer team or some of the players. When I met some of the
Mm.
players on my favorite soccer team, and just realizing or forgetting that they are human beings, because when you see
Yep.
I don't, and I know we kind of use the word creator and entertainer, musician. We kind of see those as same things, but at the end of the day, let's use the word
Yeah.
entertainer. Like they're there to entertain us, but then you think of that as their identity, and really realizing as a 9-year old that they're also a human being. Sure, they're
Exactly.
entertaining. Sure, they're representing your favorite team, but they're also a human being who has things that who they're not like gods. They're also like you and
Right.
I. And so I remember that feeling, and that's why I'm like, one day I will do something, or I didn't know about podcasting as a 9-year old, but I'm like, I really would love to at some point visit this idea of learning about what it's like to be what it's like to be another person because it's that feeling. And
Yeah.
it's a feeling that is irrational because it's like, dude, what are you doing at 9 or 8 or whatever? But it's like you remember that feeling, and there's a reason why you are still sharing that story because it meant so much to you at that time.
Exactly. Exactly. I love that a lot. I love it.
So now let's be realistic. Social justice issues is not a good okay, how do I word this? It's like it's not a good problem to have.
Right.
In the sense that like people are suffering, there are people that are at a disadvantage, but
Right.
it's a type of issue that a lot of people are involved in and they are really passionate about creating change like yourself. With that being said, you have a message, and I mentioned this when we first started, which is you have a message of optimism, authenticity, and positivity.
Yeah.
And at a time where it can be really difficult to find positivity, it can also be difficult to be yourself and authentic because sometimes it feels
Yeah.
like we have to play characters. I remember in a past podcast, I spoke with an actress and I said, I know you are a professional actress, but it also feels like we are also actors and actresses in a way because we aren't ourselves. We sometimes have to play a character that we think will be
Yeah.
accepted by people. But as someone who embraces authenticity, optimism, positivity, as cliche as it sounds, I'd love to know why those things are such an important part of your message, because it's not easy, and it sounds like, okay, who cares? Okay, of course, you're gonna say that, but you're someone that really emphasizes the importance of it. So I'd love to know why that's so important to you.
Yeah. I mean, okay. So two things on that. Number one, I truly believe that when you exist in a fallen space, a fallen country, a fallen world, a fallen environment, anywhere that has any sort of trial, tribulation, war, famine, separation, anything going on, if you're in a bad space, you as a human being have two options. Number one, you can fall along into that trap and be just as miserable and divisive and hated and hateful and just despairingly just sad all the time, or you could do the exact opposite and choose to fight against that and to work for something better, something stronger, something smarter and more helpful for other people. And I chose to do the latter. Now, it does take work. It is not easy. There are some days where I have to watch a 20-minute, comedy show episode to like distract myself from all of the terribly depressing news that, is put on our feeds every single day. Um, but it pays off to be a light in such a dark world. It pays to be kind of that glimmer of hope that people need. And speaking of hope, that actually is a great segue to my second point, is that I do love optimism. I will forever embrace that as a trait of mine. I, however, am choosing to embrace the stance of hope. And the difference between hope and optimism is that optimism is literally just glass half full or glass half full. Like it's all, good things, all that fun stuff. I think people who are hopeful recognize the gravity of what the situation is. And so if realism is like here and optimism is like right here, then hopefulness is like kind of in the middle where you know what's going on. You're not denying what's going on. It's not this toxic positivity that people think of when they think of optimism. But you being hopeful is basically saying, despite what I see, despite the state of the world, I choose to make a choice to move forward. I choose to make a choice to believe in better things, to believe in better people. And that alone gives you the motivation to keep going, to speak out about things, to live into your own gifts and skills and talents, and not succumb yourself to just, I guess, the weariness and the heaviness that this world can bring you. It's a good middle ground, if you will.
You mentioned the idea, or you mentioned how you've said that you are a work in progress, and it's something that it's obviously not just you, but everyone goes through, and it's an up and down journey. There are good
Yeah.
days and bad days. I would love to talk a little bit more about, and I don't want to, I'm not going to force you to say your darkest days unless you're comfortable, but I would love to know some of the worst days in air quotes, what
Yeah.
some of the worst days that you're grateful for, because when it comes to the idea of gratefulness, and it's a question I ask every guest, because gratefulness, and it's something that I learned from another guest I've had on the podcast, which is gratefulness is not just a positive thing. It can also weirdly, in a way, there's also a negative. It can also, you can also take away from negative experiences. You could say
Yeah.
that, at the time I thought these were some of the worst days of my life, or they were the most frustrating days of my life. But in a way, I'm thankful I went through them, because I
Yeah.
wouldn't be where I am today. obviously I don't want you to, like I said, I'm not going to be like, Marcus, tell me your darkest secrets. But I would love to know, what were some days that come to mind where you go, I went through this, I hated these days, but today I look back and I go, I'm grateful that I went through them. I didn't like them at the time, but I'm a stronger person, or I'm the person I am today because of those negative experiences.
Oof, I feel like that is like a good chunk of my life story, honestly. I think, through those hard times, that's when you are the most strong. I think that's where you gain the most perseverance from. I'll give you a specific example. During the midterm season of my junior year in undergrad. This was in 2021, I believe. We were still trying to figure out how to navigate the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic. We were trying to figure out how to still have school, but still like try to keep some sort of normalcy. Around this time, I was not doing well in classes. I had death in my family, and because of the pandemic and because of traveling, I couldn't really go home to attend the funeral of this relative that had passed not too long ago. And so that was already kind of weighing on me a little bit. And then you have hard classes, and then for the first time since, its birth, which is about a year, I got COVID. During that midterm season when all of the grades are supposed to kind of make or break your semester. And so I was out for like a week and a half because, again, this is my first time catching it. And so my body didn't know how to handle it. And so I was physically, mentally, emotionally just drained for a good 7 to 10 days. I fell behind on work. I didn't know how to deal with things happening outside of school. And I'm telling you right now, that was probably some of the worst mental health that I think I've ever had in my entire life. Now, granted, I wasn't to the point where I was contemplating like self-harm or, suicidal ideations. I wasn't near that area, but it was dark enough to where I felt like I needed to lay in my bed with all the lights off for like days at a time. Like it was not good at all. And one thing that I learned from that I kind of use as a story in other presentations and stuff that I give to people, while I was kind of sulking in my room, a huge pile of laundry, just happened to create its own little mountain in my room. And I told myself at some point I'm gonna have to get up. I'm gonna have to do my laundry because otherwise I'll have no clothes. And the best way that it was for me in order to do this laundry was to take a little bit off at a time. Just take a couple of shirts, couple of socks, couple of, pants, and just take them off the pile a little bit at a time and do what you can for that day. And when I tell people, when you're bogged down, when you are really deep and heavy in emotions, a lot of times we will tell ourselves we have to fix it all. We got to keep on going. We got to get over it. You got to have your day and then you just keep on moving. But if we rush, if we try to brush it off, if we try to deny the feelings that we have, we tend to compartmentalize it and then it opens later on down the line and you have no idea where it came from. And so being able to properly process emotions for a lot of people will be taking a little bit of it at a time, processing this event, and then processing that person and that broken friendship and that, you know, limited relationship and that job that didn't happen and that opportunity that didn't work out, being able to take one thing at a time rather than trying to address it or push it all to the side is one of the ways where you kind of work yourself out of that dark space. But I will say that that area maybe a couple of weeks in 2021, that was pretty bad. But I do appreciate it now looking back at it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I will say I won't relate to those experiences. I think, was it during pandemic? I think I was graduating high school going into my freshman year of college. And
Mhm.
I would say that was difficult for me because I was I would say I was very lazy. And it's because we had online
Mm,
school, and so I'm like, oh,
yeah,
college is gonna be easy. It's online. I got this. And then I get into in-person classes, and it's like, I don't know, that transition from high school to college just wasn't there because of the pandemic. And so
yeah.
I would say the one thing that I struggled even today is is burnout. Like for some reason, I'll just run up have a situation where I'm extremely unmotivated to do something.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a commuter student, so sometimes when I come home, my mom would be like, "Here are your clothes. Make sure you clean them or put them in the correct places." And I'll keep holding it off. And then there'll be
Mm,
times where I'm like, "Okay, let me try to do it all in one." And then it feels like it's one of those things where if I try to do all in one, I feel like I become even I can't do it. And it's sometimes to the point where I feel like I create a much bigger pile than
yeah.
originally because it's like
Yeah.
Hamza, you said you were going to do this. Here are these clothes, and it's like now that mountain becomes bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yep. Just compounding on each other.
So yeah, one thing I will say, and I think one advice I would definitely take from you, which is that try to take things one at a time and don't try to fix it all in one. Just try
Yeah.
to take a little bit off of each because it's about I don't know, I just lost my trail of thought, but it's like it's about just trying to not necessarily be mindful, but it's like you here comes my overthinking brain heating up. It's it's like you you're just you're making things a little bit easier for yourself. And it'll come
Yeah.
to a point where you're able to go, you know what, I can take this whole batch of clothes and I can do it, but it depends from person to person. So, but
Yeah.
nevertheless, I do appreciate you sharing that because it's never easy to talk about. Um, Before I let you go, let's transition into the future because
Yeah.
we've talked about the past, we've talked about where you are at now a little bit, or yeah, we've talked about now. Let's talk about the two things that I have. I mean, I'm sure you have more knowledge of, but your ebook and of course your podcast. Now, what I want to talk about I'd love for you to talk about your ebook, a little bit of what it's about, because I know that's coming out either in later 2024, early 2025. Tell me a little bit about the book. And secondly, what gave you the courage to write a book? And I say courage because sometimes I think a lot of us have like really good ideas. I remember when I first
Yeah.
started this podcast, I was like, I have a great idea. I want to learn about people's stories. But then there's always this doubt that comes inside of you that creeps in you where it's like, no one's gonna like listen to this, no one's gonna read this or watch this. And then
Yeah.
sometimes you're like, actually maybe my negative self is right. I remember there's been many times as I've continued on with this podcast where it's like, okay, I'm gonna do this story, or I'm gonna get to know this person's story, or I'm gonna interview them, or I'm gonna talk to them, and then my negative self is like, no, just quit your podcast or cancel this
Yeah.
interview. You got no one's gonna listen to this. So and all in all, tell me a bit about the book, and then secondly, what gave you the courage to write one? Because sometimes it's like you have the worry of others, or more importantly, there's that negative self that's trying to overtake your potential.
Yeah. So the ebook. I will say number one that the ebook initially was birthed out of people really trying to learn more about how to be an ally, how to be in the fight for justice, for representation, for all these things, especially in the Gen Z realm. We saw a lot of just performative allyship in 2020 and 2021 after George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, you name it. And so this was kind of like my how to handbook for how to be a great ally and how to really show up for people who have been marginalized, who have been at the margins of society. Now, since then, a couple of things have happened. So, number one, being able to experience college, experience a lot of different jobs, even outside of college, working in the entrepreneurship space, working in the higher ed space, working in the creative space. It's been a little bit more so not just about anti-racism and justice, but about how do we create meaningful connections with one another? How do we envision a better world and a better society by connecting and by meeting each other on a human level? And so, despite my crazy overthinking as well, I've decided to just go ahead and make this a full out book, and not make it digital, but actually make like a hard copy book, which will take a lot more, manufacturing, publishing, marketing, all these fun things. But I knew that I've always had some things to say and some wisdom and some inspiration to give to people. And, I've been making this up of short stories and reflections and things that I've had for the past, I want to say, decade of my life. And so being able to put this all together in a lovely little collection of, tidbits and quotes and things that I've learned, I think is going to be really, really great. And so the goal is to teach people how to be connectors. And of course, we're going to say that that's through storytelling, and I actually want to include real stories from my life in the book to actually give people a sense of what are these universal kindergarten lessons we can learn from each other and from people who on the surface would be very different from you. And so I'm really excited. I have no idea how long it's going to take to actually bring it to fruition, but the goal is before my 25th birthday, which is the end of this year, to at least have the full manuscript done of this book that will probably be like, I don't know, like tens of thousands of words. But I'm excited. I think it'll be really, really cool.
I can't wait to see it. I love reading books. Lately, I've been buying way more books than I need to, or way more books than my shelf can take. But I love reading books because it's like it's all about learning about people's stories. And
Yeah,
yeah, I can't. I prefer the hardcover as opposed to the ebook because there's something about that hardcover where it's like it's an actual book. But
exactly.
yeah, I can't wait to read the first page and it says Marcus Knight. First things first, I am not a bad person.
Listen, I think you're convincing me to make that the first line, and I just might.
Let's talk about your podcast before we wrap up. I really
Yes.
enjoyed this conversation, and I'm confident that you're going to be a great podcaster as well. Your podcast is called a Roundtable. First things first, is your podcast actually taking place in a roundtable?
No, it would actually be really cool if it did. I might have to make a request, a little design request for that. It's simply just a play off of my last name, Knight. And kind of leaning into like the lore and mythology and history of like Knights of the Round Table and stuff like that, and just kind of making that inner circle type feel, for letting people in on my own thoughts and my friends that are doing amazing things and other young people who are just making the world better.
No, that's pretty cool. It's interesting because I remembered I had a friend that I told him about my podcast, and she said, at the time when you told me about this podcast, I thought it was a cooking podcast because, oh my curry goodness. But the reason why I said that was because, and I've said a lot of times on my own, in different episodes, when we hear stories that are interesting, we say, oh my goodness. And then I have
Right.
curry because a lot of times people like to emphasize the goodness part. So they'll say, oh my freaking goodness, or oh my insert curse word
Right.
goodness. I was like, I want to make it cool and something that's kind of me. Like I love curry. I mean, as someone who's South Asian, curry is a very popular
Yeah.
dish. So I'm like, oh my goodness, curry. Oh, curry, my goodness. That sounds too much. Oh my curry goodness just sounded pretty cool.
I
And
love it.
the interesting, and then what's even more interesting was that it originally I wanted to name my podcast "Wait What" with Hamza Islam because again, it's like, wait, this is what you went through. But then I found out that there's like
Mm.
six different podcasts, so I'm like, I need to create a podcast that's unique. So I told my friend, and I was like, we're gonna name it "Oh My Curry Goodness," and then she said, because she was the one that did the cover art of the podcast. She was like, "That is the most you thing that you could
I
ever come up
love
with,"
it.
and I'm
I
like,
love it.
"Perfect. No one's ever stealing that." I used to. One of the things I tried to do was I wanted to call my little community of guests that I've interviewed like Curryville. The problem is that there is a city in Missouri called Curryville.
Oh
So
wow.
yeah, I didn't even know that. I'm like, first of all, do people even know what curry is in Curryville? I
Yeah,
don't know. I
I
don't
don't
know.
think they do.
um, but nevertheless, so obviously you have the round table, and it goes back to the kind of like tied to your last name, Knight. Now, in terms of talking about news surrounding Gen Z, tell me a bit about what led you to go to that track, and how are
Yeah.
you embracing those uncomfortable conversations? Because there's a lot of topics that Gen Z is passionate about, but can sometimes have more questions than answers. So,
Yeah.
yeah, just tell me a bit about what led you to start it, and how are you embracing those difficult yet necessary conversations.
Well, I'll start off by saying it is okay to ask the questions. I think it is a good thing to be curious and to not always feel like you always have it figured out. I think the moment we stop asking questions, the moment we stop being open and vulnerable and open-minded, we start to get this kind of prideful attitude, and then we just can't ever be a learner because we think we know it all. And so I honestly think the more questions the better, the more that we can do our own research, the more we can lean into these follow-up questions with people. This idea was birthed out of a conversation that I had with an elder from my church, where they basically said, young people, they're just going astray. They don't know what's going on. They're rowdy. They have no sense of like purpose in life. They're all out here doing horrible things. When in reality, a lot of the people that I know who are very young are changing the world, who are doing amazing, amazing things. We have Gen Z members of Congress. We have Gen Z talk show hosts. We have Gen Z, climate change activists. We have Gen Z content creators. Like we have so many different types of Gen Z. And I want people to know that there are young people who are actually doing good things in the world, and that we are leaving our society, our culture, our climate, our politics in good hands, if they want to believe it or not. But I want to let people know that there are some people out here that are really doing that human connection work, and they just so happen to be on the younger side. So I'm really excited to hopefully get some people in here, and know that you will probably be among the first group, the first batch of people who get to come on. But I'm excited to see what stories can unfold, and they're all not, hopefully they're all not according to my worldview. And so my hope is that I can even learn from some people across the aisle as well.
For sure. And one thing I'll add when you talked about asking questions, great answers come from great questions, right? So that's something to keep
Exactly.
an eye on. My last question. This is a question I've been asking of my guests lately. I've
Yeah.
been overthinking it way too much. If it's a bad question, as I've always said, I can cut it, but I also feel like it's a necessary one. So it's similar to the question where we talked about what are some of the most difficult days that you're grateful for. Now, it's also similar to the question, what would you tell your younger self? Now, as someone who's been doing a lot of research on how to ask questions, here we go. So, looking back, sometimes when we, especially when our in our worst days, we sometimes say something that we think can make us feel good, but it ends up making us feel worse. So it's like one of
Mm,
those things where you go like, "Oh, I'm gonna say this, and I'm like, this is gonna make me feel strong, or I'm gonna get out of the situation." But then you realize, you look back and you go, "Oh, that what I said made me feel worse. I didn't get to where I wanted to go. Instead, I
mm.
went instead of a step forward, I took two or three steps backward." When you look back in your life, was there anything that you have said or did to yourself that at the time you thought was gonna help you become better or take one step forward, but it ended up making you take a few steps backward?
Ooh, wow. That is actually a great question. I think one of the things that I think I said a lot to myself, or rather did a lot, was wait for permission. A lot of times when confronted with a task or a challenge or something to where I just kind of had to make a call, um, I would often say, I'm just gonna wait until somebody gives me the okay, until somebody says all the information that I need, until somebody can, check behind me to make sure that I'm doing good. Like there was a lot of walking on glass or walking on eggshells before making decisions because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't making mistakes, that I wasn't, doing the wrong things or, saying the wrong things or making the wrong step. But I slowly learned and realized as I got older is that that really instilled a lot of imposter syndrome in me. It created a lot of self-doubt and honestly just like fear and anxiety about taking risks and doing things just because you know that it's the right thing to do, not because somebody else said that was the right thing, but simply just because you know deep down in your heart that it's what you need to do. My most recent job that I have at my alma mater, that was all out of a choice that I made by myself to go away from my hometown, to leave my family, to leave my church, to leave my neighborhood with no car, with little money, with no higher education experience, and work at my alma mater in a higher education fellowship. It literally didn't make any sense. And a lot of people would have said, maybe you should just like stay here. Maybe you should be comfortable. Maybe you should just wait a while and things of that nature. But for like, I would probably say the first time really in my life, I told myself it is time for me to just do the thing, to just make the decision, and to not wait on the approval of others to do what you know in your heart that you were called and qualified to do. And so now, 9 months later, I'm towards the end of my year-long fellowship, and I've had some of the craziest, most awesome experiences with some of the coolest people on the planet. And I also just got to serve and pour back into my alma mater that has poured into me for the past 5 years. And so I've just been kind of living in my independence a little bit more. Obviously, there's some still, some work still to be done, still trying to get out there and do the thing. This book is going to be a very big part of that, about just kind of going with the vision that you've been given and not really giving a crap about what anybody else has to say about it. So, very, very excited about the days ahead.
For sure. And I'll say this, Marcus, you're not a bad person, but
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
it'll be funny when it comes to naming this episode. I don't know what to do. I'll probably just say Marcus Knight. I'm not a bad person, or sometimes people put like a content warning where it's like this video will talk about this, and I'll just say content
Uh-huh.
warning. My guest is not a bad person. They'll be,
Honestly, I'm here for it. I think people will definitely get a kick out of
they'll be like,
that.
yeah, he is definitely not a bad person. But no, you're an amazing person, and I know you love spreading positivity. in Optimism, and I could see it during our conversation. You just love talking to people, and I have no doubt that you're going to be a great podcaster. So, Marcus, I know that you have a crazy schedule, but I'm so glad to make this podcast conversation possible.
Yes.
Thank you so much for, or I'm so grateful to make this conversation possible. Yeah, that made grammatically sense. Um, Nevertheless, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Best of luck with your book. I'll be sure to get it when it comes out. Best of luck with the roundtable, and more importantly, I hope we get to meet in person.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation, and I can't wait for more to come.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you guys like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, preview clips, and more. Please continue to support this podcast in the future, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode.